Good. Well, if we could all mute when we're not speaking, that would be great. Thank you. Lovely. Good morning, everybody. We're just going to wait for a few more seconds to let people join the call. There's a few more people in the waiting room just joining this morning. Here we go. Just a few more people still joining. All right, I'm going to get started because I make it gone 10 o'clock and there's a few more people joining as we speak. But good morning, everybody. My name is Tom Dawson, Interim COO of the Association for Cultural Enterprises. And welcome to our end of summer review, sad face, of the Commercial Performance Barometer from the Association of Cultural Enterprises. Today, we'll be looking back at summer visitor numbers, commercial performance, some sentiment analysis, and a few case studies of how members have been performing over the last season. It's a chance to reflect on what the season has told us and what it might mean for the months ahead. And I'm delighted to be joined by a couple of insightful guides through the data and trends. You could call them the Sherlock and Dr. Watson, the Spock and Captain Kirk, or maybe the Mystic Meg and Nostradamus. I'll let you decide which is which. It's John Young from Decision House and Ollie Reed from Navigate. We'll be hearing from them in a second. But actually, yesterday was the first official day of our brand new chief exec. So I know some of you will be very familiar on the call with Paul Griffiths, but we wanted to take the opportunity to officially welcome Paul to the association and say hello. So good morning, Paul.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Well, good morning, everyone. Day 2 officially for me now as the new Chief Executive Officer of the Association for Cultural Enterprises. Tom said my name is Paul Griffiths. I'm absolutely thrilled and honoured to be taking up this role, and a great first formal event, I guess, this morning with the Commercial Barometer session. And I think this is a real sort of piece of work that's so central to what we do as an association. These sorts of sessions give us a chance to step back, look at the data, understand sector trends. And, I think for me going forward, data and insights can be so important to what we do to support you as members from the association, help you all make confident decisions, advocate for your work and give you real data to go back when you're chatting to your boards and your bosses and tell them about what you've been doing, what's also going on in the sector, and also plan ahead with some real resilience. And I'm really looking forward over the coming months to meeting so many members. We've got lots and lots of events coming up, which I'll be at, and obviously try and get around to as many organisations as I can to meet people. Really want to listen to what your experiences are, listen to what you want as members from the association. We do have our latest member survey coming out in about another month or so. So please do look out for that, because that's going to be really essential for you telling us what you really want from the association. And then myself, Tom, and the rest of the team can act upon that and really sort of put into life what you want. And also another plug is that the conference will be going on sale very soon. So obviously one of the crucial parts of our yearly calendar, and really exciting stuff coming up there. So really looking forward to meeting you. Together, I think we can really work together to make sure that commercial enterprises isn't seen as just as a bolt-on. It is seen as something that's really essential to sustainability and creativity across all of your organisations. So I'll hand back to Tom now, chairing the session. On the thanks very much to John and Ollie for all their work on this. I'm really looking forward to the session this morning. So I hope you all have a really informative morning. Thank you, everyone.
Lovely. Thank you, Paul. So just a few very brief bits of housekeeping. We're recording the call, so we'll be able to share the session with you afterwards and with people who aren't able to make it this morning. The webinar chat is open at the bottom of the screen. You'll see the chat button. Feel free to pop in any questions at any point, and we'll try and answer them as much as we can on the call. So without further ado, let's get into the meat of this. I'm going to hand straight over to John Young, who is Audience Research Director at Navigate. At Decision House, rather. Important distinction there. John at Decision House, Decision House are our insights partner, and John runs the Commercial Performance Barometer for us. John, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Tom. Can you all see the screen? the presentation, that is.
Yeah, look
Um,
good.
yeah, brilliant. Well, great. Thanks, Tom. And also welcome everybody. Great to see you all again. So yeah, in terms of today's presentation, as Tom mentioned, I'll be leading off, and then Ollie will be following up. My presentation, it'll probably be around 20 minutes. If you've sat in one of these previously, then you'll be quite familiar with the order. So just to start off with, I'll just quickly introduce the Commercial Performance Barometer. I can see some names on here that do take part, but I think some of you may be new to it. We'll then quickly cover the context that we're all operating in, just to sort of give you a bit of background that hopefully helps us understand some of the data. Then we'll go into visitor admissions, followed by secondary spend, a little section on the power of programming, um, one or two slides on special questions that we ask each month, and then some reflections, and then I'll hand over to Ollie. So just quickly introducing the Commercial Performance Barometer. So just to take a step back in terms of, I guess, explaining why we do this. So when we started this back in, I think, November, in terms of putting our proposals together and constructing the questionnaire, we had two main objectives. The first was to inform the sector around commercial performance, and to do so relatively quickly. There's lots of different measures out there, but often they can take some time to be published, and also to inspire with examples of commercial best practice. And we hopefully do a bit of that, a bit of both in today's presentation. And as I mentioned, the key thing for us was to try and do it with speed and simplicity in terms of the questionnaire and the outputs, and hopefully today's presentation as well. So in terms of what it involves, so again, those of you who've done it every single month will be very familiar with this. But for anyone who's new, just a quick overview. So we do this short survey once a month. Those of you who are a multi-site organization can do it via Excel, and those are single sites organizations can do it via an online survey. And we ask questions on your profile, admissions, catering, retail, average transaction value and spend per visitor, as well as some more qualitative questions around how you feel, and what is driving performance. And each month we ask some special questions around well, it could be whatever's current, or whatever you guys have asked for. And we'll cover some of that a bit later. And in terms of the outputs, we produce two dashboards on a monthly basis, and these are updated by the end of the month. So we have one dashboard where you can look at the data, you can filter by type of sites, region, and lots of other ways. We produce a monthly blog once we've crunched the data, and also some webinars at key points in the year. So obviously this is, I think it's the third installment of those. Okay, and finally, in terms of context and background, so the story so far, we've collected data for each month between January and August. We have now over 250 participating venues. I think it's 265 at the latest count, and representation across the UK, so each country in the UK and also beyond. So we have, I think, two participating from the Republic of Ireland, and we've had one or two from elsewhere as well. So, we do have really great coverage and a range of different types of venues as too. Okay, just another sort of contextual section really, and this is just to look at the context that venues are operating in. So I guess the first key point is that the financial climate continues to be quite challenging. So this chart here is taken from the ONS's website, and they ask a question of the British public every month around whether their cost of living has increased in the past month or not. And that dark, that sort of navy line at the top there, has basically been higher. So that shows those who say cost of living has increased, and that has been higher than those that have said it has decreased for the last year or so. And I guess the key takeout there is that people are still really feeling the pinch, and that is obviously going to impact their spending behaviour. very much linked to that is the ONS's savings ratio. And this is always a really good indication of how much money people are spending on their leisure. And that's in the top right of your screen now. And basically, since around Q1 2022, that savings ratio has increased month on month. There was a slight dip in the first quarter of this year, but it's still a lot higher than it was a couple of years ago. You can also see that spike during the pandemic as well, but it just shows where people's minds are at. They are holding back a little bit. So if you have been struggling, if you do feel people are spending less and holding back, then you are probably right, and this is why. And on top of that, we obviously have inflation, so 4.1% overall, and food and beverage, that's 5.1%, restaurants 3.8%. So all of those will impact you amongst whether it's your visitor spending or the costs for your catering and retail. So clearly quite challenging times. I think another sort of area we like to look at, and this is particularly pertinent for the attraction sector, is weather. So we've had another year or another 8 months or so of quite extreme weather. So I've summarized it on this page. So you can see back in January, we had the strongest storm for 10 years. We had a fairly settled February, but from March to June, we had the fourth, third, and first and sixth hottest months on record, and those records go back 143 years. So that's pretty extreme, I'd say. July was relatively changeable, and actually this worked quite well for a lot of cultural venues. The weather sort of changed to being a bit more rainy, a bit colder, just as the school holidays kicked in, and I know a number of you benefited from that. And then August was the 11th hottest August on record, so still quite hot, although I guess we do expect that in the core summer months. And just a couple more stats. Visit Britain and Visit England obviously publish their domestic and international tourism figures as often as they can. These boxes here look at the domestic picture. So holiday trips between January and June was 6% down on 2024. Holiday nights 12% down. So people are taking shorter holidays. Holiday spend slightly up, but obviously there are fewer people to do that spending, which will impact visits to attractions. And often the overnight trips can sort of be displaced by day visits, but day visits are also down, and day visit spend too, so 4% and 8% on 2024. So clearly, all of the factors that we just mentioned are driving a drop in this sort of leisure behaviour. And finally, in this section, there's overseas demand. So Visit Britain currently have a dashboard which looks at flight search data to the UK, and it's a really useful up-to-date indication of demand for trips to the UK. And broadly speaking, this year, until June anyway, flight search data to the UK was down. Positively, that has now recovered. So July and August, we saw a rise in flight searches to the UK. And overall this year, searches are now 2.6% up, which is great considering where we were. And actually, if we look at the USA, a country that we were really quite worried about a few months ago, that has picked up too. So there are some positive signs there, but broadly speaking, across the year so far, it's been quite challenging. Okay, so that's the context, and that context gives us a lot of sort of hypotheses that we can, and I guess, a rationale to dig into the data in certain ways as we go through, and we will do that within this section. So first of all, looking at the picture in terms of visitor admissions. So those of you who've been in these presentations previously will be familiar with these charts. And here what we're looking at is the average admissions versus 2024 by individual month. So we've got all the way from January to August with a box around the summer months. And we've also got a year-to-date figure as well. So in June this year, we introduced the year-to-date question. So relatively reliable indication of where the sector is. So I guess there's a few things I'd sort of pull out of here. The first is that it's been a relatively mixed first 6 months. And I guess we had a very good April, very good Easter, a decent May. June and July slightly below last year, and we had a fairly positive August, or at least in line with last year. Year to date, we're only just down on 2024. So given the context and some of the slides I just showed you, I'd say that's not a bad result. There is obviously quite a lot of nuance around the types of sites, and we will go through that later in this section. Now looking at the breakdown of admission changes. So if you have been in these presentations before, you'll know that I do like to show this as well as the average that we saw in the previous slides. And the reason we do like to show this is because averages don't tell the whole story. It's easy to look at an average and then sort of compare yourself to that. But what this shows here is that in any given month, a large proportion of venues have experienced either a rise on 2024 or a fall on 2024. So if we look at this chart here, we can, and maybe we'll go straight to August, we can see that as many individual venues experienced a rise on last year as experienced a fall on last year. And I guess in terms of how you read this, I guess if you are above the average or below the average, then it means you are in good company. And as we'll see in the next few slides, there is a bit more nuance to the figures that we publish. Okay. So we talked about the nuance in terms of the figures. So obviously we showed you some of the extreme weather a little bit earlier. One of the questions that we ask in participating venues to respond to within the survey is, in your own words, what internal or external factors do you feel influenced your site's commercial performance in that given month? So we typically get about 65 to 70 responses each month. And without fail, weather has been the #1 most mentioned factor driving commercial performance. So you can see on this chart here that we've split the negative comments around weather from the positive comments, and in every month, with the exception of July, there have been more negative comments. So clearly, weather is having a strong influence on visits, and that's over and above normal. So obviously, weather will always impact things, but here we're trying to understand the differences to 2024. The one exception was July, and as I mentioned earlier, that was relatively changeable. But from mid-July, when the English school holidays kicked in, we did see, I think, some good weather for indoor attractions, and I think that's why we've had a slightly more positive comments there. Very much linked to that, when we split sites by indoor and outdoor venues, then we do see some really key differences. So I've got the extreme weather again. So if we look at some of these months, we had some really bad weather in January, the worst storm in 10 years, and that led to really poor relative performance for outdoor venues. So that's the green line. In April, we had very hot weather relative to 2024, and this meant that outdoor venues did really well, but indoor venues didn't do so well. And bearing in mind that was that was Easter, and last year Easter was in March. That 1% increase for indoor venues was actually quite a poor result. And in July, we had poor weather at the end of the month, which didn't work well for outdoor venues either. So actually, it has to some extent balanced out a little bit through the year. Because if we look at the figures on the right-hand side, January to August, you can see that both are sort of hovering around 0, but indoor venues slightly below last year. But you can really see the impact that weather has, and I guess we're lucky that it's balanced out a bit, but perhaps in future years it may not. So I guess being insured against this unpredictable weather is helpful. Another one of our sort of, I guess, hypotheses is that venues that are free and charging may experience different fortunes, particularly with cost of living. I think what's quite interesting here is that broadly speaking, free and charging venues have sort of tracked each other, but there are some key differences. And what's quite interesting is that performance tends to come together during the holidays. So we've got during the school holidays, that is. So we've got February half term, Easter in April, and obviously the summer holiday, the school holidays in August. And here we can see that actually performance was almost identical. But what's quite interesting, and this is just a hypothesis, is that immediately after the holidays, we do see some gaps. So there's an implication here that immediately after the school holidays, when I guess you have to do stuff with your children, those who do have children, then perhaps they're cutting back. So you can see in January there was a big gap. In March there was a gap, and also in May, and maybe we'll see the same in September. Perhaps there are some implications here around getting people to come back after the holiday, perhaps around discounting, etc. And finally, in terms of looking at different types of venue, we mentioned earlier that search data to the UK from overseas has been relatively low, and we also saw a drop in domestic tourism based on Visit England's reporting. We don't have a filter for venues that attract lots of overseas visitors, but we can look at a proxy of that. So if we look at London venues and venues attracting over 500,000 visitors, I guess, this is a proxy for venues that do have a sort of a strong tourist mix. You can see that broadly speaking, they have done worse than all the sector overall. So looking at London venues, which is the red line here, they've performed below 2024 for every single month, with the exception of April, when during Easter. And venues attracting over 500,000 visitors, fairly similar. And both of these types of venue below last year compared to when we look at year to date. So clearly the fall in domestic and also international tourism, is impacting things. And a number of you have mentioned that your overseas visitors are lower than last year. One really key audience, of course, is the US audience. And back in June, we asked what impact the tariffs had on visits specifically from the US. Obviously, it's quite early to tell, and it's maybe a difficult one to understand without some visitor research. But clearly, for some of you, they have had a strong impact already, and this was just June. 1 in 5 of you able to confidently say that they've had a negative impact, and we've got some quotes here. We're seeing fewer visits from the US by about 50%. There's been an approximately 16% drop in American ticket sales. We don't think we've seen the worst of this yet. I guess we can't be 100% confident it is the tariffs, but clearly there has been a drop off in US visitors. But as I mentioned earlier, flight search data from the USA was up on 2024 in July and August. So hopefully that's we may have seen the worst of it, or there is light at the end of the tunnel at least. Okay, so that's admissions. Now jumping on to secondary spend. This section we look at catering and retail. So first of all, looking at catering, average transaction value and spend per visit. So broadly speaking, it's a fairly positive story. So we look at this on a monthly basis with a January to August average. That's a straight average across each month. And if we go straight to that average on the right-hand side, we can see that both ATV and SPV are in line with or above inflation. So that's a fairly positive picture. And if we look at some of the other data, if we looking at spend per visitor multiplied by admissions, we can understand the income, and that's 3% up. The average average transaction value is £8.30, highest in the school holidays, and spend per visit £2.23, and our conversion figure at 25%. But broadly, I say the key take up from this chart is that it's a relatively positive picture for catering. Less so for retail, and this is a similar to story that we've shared in previous presentations. So with the exception of January, we've seen lower than inflation rises in spend per visitor and average transaction value in each month this year. So I think, that's quite, particularly the spend per visitor, that's quite important. So clearly, revenue with retail is struggling. And if we look at the income in this table on the left, you can see that that's pretty flat compared to 2024. And if we take inflation into account, then I guess it's a net drop. So one of the questions we've been asking ourselves, because this is not the first time this has come up, is why catering is doing okay and why retail is struggling a little bit. And I guess there are a number of potential drivers of that. I think one driver perhaps is that catering is maybe essential spend. If you're on site with your family, you are going to need to buy some food if you haven't brought your own. Retail perhaps less so. But one thing that we were quite interested in understanding is this driven by price rises as opposed to the demand side? So in the latest month survey, we asked this special question around how much you have increased on-site retail prices in the last 12 months. And this was really, really revealing. So I'll talk you through this chart. If you look at the left-hand column, we can see that 75% of venues with a catering offer have increased their prices in line with inflation or above inflation. So predominantly in line with or above inflation. But if we look at retail, then there's a mixed picture. So around half have done so, but just over half have either increased prices below inflation, they've stayed the same, or they've even decreased them. And quite a big chunk have actually kept prices the same. So I think this is really interesting and could be partly driving what we've seen on the last 2 pages, but it also shows that there are clearly very different strategies across sites. One thing that we also did, and I found this incredibly interesting, is we looked at those who had increased their prices in line with inflation or above inflation, and then we also looked at those who had increased them below inflation, or they'd stayed the same or decreased. And interestingly, those that had increased the prices the least were more likely to report higher average transaction value and spend per visitor, and quite a bit higher as well. And there's about 36 in each of those buckets, 36 venues. So I think relatively reliable. Obviously, the price changes is quite a complex thing, and we're not going to suddenly recommend that you don't increase your prices. But perhaps it does touch on the sort of psychology around certainly the customer. If prices are lower, they may be more inclined to add more items to their basket, for example. There may just be a perception of cheapness or affordability. But I think certainly at least this may be something worth looking at or worth trialing within your own venues, because it feels like there is something going on there. Obviously, there are other factors to consider around margins and etc., but perhaps something to think about. And one sort of last slide, data slide, is we also asked the question around the impact of US tariffs on trade with the US. And again, this relates to retail. This is largely e-commerce, but again, we've seen some negative impacts of tariffs. So you can read some of these quite clearly in the quotes on the right. So we were not able to reorder our best sellers due to tariff increases. We'd already lost Europe due to Brexit, and now we've lost America as well. We've seen a significant fall in US sales. US orders on our online died a death as soon as they were announced, moving from 9% of our online total to under 1%. So clearly, that some of these factors are really influencing performance. And for some, I think that also influenced their on-site retail too, because a number of some sites order in their stock from the US. So a number of factors driving performance there. So very quickly, I want to sort of highlight some really nice examples of venues that are performing, I guess, relatively well in retail. So we've got a few examples here. of participants saying that adding new ranges has had a really positive impact on performance. So whether it's English Heritage adding new retail ranges and actively selling them, Chester Beatty Library in the Republic of Ireland referring to some new Irish handmade jewellery, selling 50 pairs worth €2,000 in just August alone. Museum of the University of St Andrews, stock lines has made a big difference. Roald Dahl Museum and Story Centre mentioned a new museum exclusive book that has proven very popular. Jane Austen's house, and a plug for Tom's great podcast episode with them last month. And they're celebrating an anniversary year, and they brought in a product range that's been very successful in line with that. And Florence Nightingale Museum with some new stock ranges too. We also see some venues that have put price increases on their key sellers. So Imperial War Museum mentioning that, and Chester Beatty Library again increasing the price of postcards from 50 cents to 75 cents, but all making a bit of a difference. So it may not be that sort of overarching rising in line with inflation that we saw in the previous slides, but it could just be sort of selectively increasing prices on some bestsellers. So I'm now going to quickly move on to the importance of programming for the next 5 to 6 minutes before I hand over to Ollie. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the questions we ask is what factors are driving your performance, and beyond weather, programming is the most mentioned factor. So again, looking at the positive mentions and the negative mentions, broadly speaking, programming is mentioned as a positive, particularly in July and August this year. So in August, it's had a really, really strong impact on performance. And if you remember, admissions were in line with last year. Where it's mentioned negatively, it's usually because there was a really successful exhibition or event back in 2024, or the programming doesn't have commercials in mind. And I think this is a regular complaint from venues that the programming has not considered the commercial benefits, and it then has a really strong knock-on effect. And I've mentioned this several times in previous presentations. A few examples of this. I'm not going to read all of these out because I've got some selective examples I want to go through, but loads and this is really an illustration of how many venues say that programming impacts performance. You can see there are 8 different venues mentioned here. But jumping into some specific examples, so the Baltic Centre for Contemporary Art mentioned that they partnered with Newcastle United FC to host a showcase of the club's road to Wembley. So this was an exhibition of photographs, film and audio, and they also had the Carabao Cup on display. If you're not a football fan, then Newcastle United won a domestic trophy for the first time in 70 years. This year just gone. So this was a celebration of that. But it over 4 days, it attracted 21,000 visitors, many first timers, and a £21,000 turnover in the shop. So really highlight what I really like about this is how responsive it is. They obviously couldn't plan for Newcastle winning a domestic trophy. Having not done so for 70 years, but they were able to respond to it. And I know so many venues that we work with plan their exhibition cycles years in advance. And I really like the fact that there is some room for responsiveness here. It wouldn't be one of our webinars without mentioning the Old Royal Naval College, and they've sort of referenced the Labyrinth on the Thames Music Festival that they that ran this summer. It brought in 57,000 visitors, an increase of nearly 2,000 followers on Instagram, a 500% increase in traffic to the What's On page. So I guess medium to long term, some really strong outcomes there, even though the actual visitors through the doors may have dropped as a result. The Roald Dahl Museum and Story Centre trialing some new workshops at different price points. And what they found was that the high price point workshops attracted an audience that also spent more on secondary spend. Chester Beatty Library again, referencing some special exhibition related books that sold well. The Ashmolean Museum, so they've had a really strong August, and that's down to their opening of a new exhibition, This Is What You Get, which is related to Radiohead, Tom York. And I think you're going to have that song in your head for all morning now. And that has had a really strong impact. Visitor numbers up 10%, exhibition visitor numbers up 254%. Some really positive outcomes there. And just that bottom point around programming, how important it is for us. Programming is critical. They also did some really sort of innovative marketing. So they managed to market the exhibition in a nearby hotel's front window. And also, I mean, the visual, the shop looks stunning as well. And finally, in this section, I'm going to hand over to Ollie very, very soon. I just wanted to mention again, we mentioned this last time, was the Cats in Cartoons exhibition at the Cartoon Museum. And this is an example of an exhibition that has a long tail, and I apologize for the pun, I couldn't resist. But back in March, when the Cartoon Museum submitted their survey, they were sort of highlighting that they were suffering from leaks in the restaurant. The temporary exhibition isn't bringing in visitors. April, the Cats and Cartoons exhibition starts, and we've had very, very positive feedback on it in each month. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 months of the exhibition driving footfall and spend in the shop, and just some really strong positive comments here that highlight its effectiveness. So this is a really nice story of how I guess a site can go from struggling a little bit to doing really well just because of that programming. And having read this, I think 5 times in 5 consecutive months, I ended up visiting myself. And I really recommend it as well. I bought that Tabby McTap book that you can see in the background, which I think I know off by heart, having read it to my toddler about 200 times, but I really do recommend it. Great, and I'm going to skip through this very quickly because I'm conscious of time, but just so you're aware, if you are a member, you can have access to these special questions. We asked around the price of a souvenir book back in, I think, May or June. Around £4.47 overall. I think I did also want to mention the conversion rates for guidebooks, and so around 4% across all sites. But I wanted to highlight the Imperial War Museum London and I guess all of their sites at their best practice. So even for a free site, Imperial War Museum London, they are managing a 5.6% strike rate. And yeah, I've got one of those on my desk as well, actually. Great. So, and just so you're aware, you can look at this in your own time. We have venue higher sales are doing better than last year. So I guess this will be driving performance to some extent, and bookings are slightly later. Okay, and a great bit of best practice on that with the Foundling Museum. So I'm going to hand over to Ollie now. Conscious I haven't given you a huge amount of time, and maybe we'll have time for questions after that.
Thank you, John. I'll just say there's a question about Welsh participants, John. I don't know if you're able to answer that whilst we hand over to Ollie. But yeah, Ollie, if you want to share your screen, over to you. That was brilliant, John. So much insight there. And as I said, we'll be sharing the recording with everyone post event. Ollie, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much. John, do you want to quickly answer that question on Wales? Because I think that's important.
Yeah, so we currently have participation from CADU and also 1 or 2 other organisations. There's about 6 or 7 at the moment, but we have currently Wales and South West grouped together. But as soon as we have enough in Wales, we'll split it out.
Nice, cool, awesome. So this is just a brief kind of overview from myself. So I'm Ollie, I work for Navigate Marketing Agency, marketing partner of Association of Cultural Enterprises. So this is basically, John has just showed us the state of play, all the data, and I think it's really important to kind of work out how do we turn those insights and that data into action, and really how do we drive that for the rest of the year? Because I think, as John said, the start of the year, or we're near the end now, it's gone well, or slightly better than last year or not. So what can we do in the last 3 months to really make a difference? So I'm just going to go over some priorities for the remaining quarter of the year. So first up, I think what's really important is the messaging and the reassurance in that messaging for your audiences, because as John said, the cost of living is still squeezing visitors. And I think visitors really need to know clarity of what your offer is and what that value is, not just financially value, but the emotive value and the experience they're going to have. And also clarity on how to book as well. So they need to be booking as quickly as possible, no friction whatsoever. I think that's really, really important. Next, it's important to kind of emphasize, oh, hang on, I can't see my screen, so I'm going to just move that one over there. Emphasize kind of flexible ticketing where you can, and inclusivity as well. And I think when it comes to family audiences, that's really, really important. They need to kind of feel that your tickets are inclusive for them and their family makeup as well. And finally, I think it's really important to frame visits as affordable kind of days out. So it's not just an afternoon. I think sometimes when we talk about our experiences and our places, we try to frame them as if it's like a gym or a supermarket, but you and the places you work in are some of the most inspirational places that people can visit. I think it's important to really showcase that in our messaging as well. Next up, as John's mentioned, programming is really, really vital, and that kind of isn't just about the summer holidays, but the rest of the year as well. So half term, Halloween, Christmas, New Year are all peak opportunities for commercial programming. Now, when we're talking about programming, it doesn't have to be this big, organizational wide thing. It can be a trail, it can be a new event, it can be a themed area. All of that will feed into reasons to visit and reasons to come back. And I think what's really important when it comes to programming is to treat it as news, as not just something that you put on the website and that's what, and fingers crossed people will come. Whether it's on your socials or emails, your advertising, treat it as news so that people kind of feel like, actually, this is something new, this is something we've got to go and visit, and we've got to go and visit now. And actually, I think someone from the museum you mentioned, the Cartoon Museum, said their cat exhibition is finishing this weekend. So if anyone wants to go to that, you need to get on that quickly because it's ending soon. And obviously, in terms of this time of year, family friendly is vital when it comes to Halloween and Christmas. Mixing a family friendly offering with that kind of festive feeling will literally be the highest conversion potential, because people are still looking for that classic experience, that classic day out. If people are going to invest their savings or their limited finances, they want to be sure they're going to have a great time. So yeah, really focusing on that. And lastly, I think what's really important in terms of the areas is flexibility. Weather obviously is a massive factor in whether people book early or not. And actually this summer, a few of our clients, we worked with about 50 different organizations in the UK. Late booking was a really, really big trend, and people were leaving at last minute, even for events or festivals. So I think what's really important is to maybe look at early booking incentives. Why should people book in? Why should people confirm they're going to come? Maybe that incentive is important. And then if there's a late booking offer, is there flexibility around that booking that people can use? Secondly, I think it's important to push catering. As John said, catering is doing all right this year. So kind of focus on that. If people are going to spend the money, make it as easy as possible to do so. And when it comes to retail, I think I'll come on to in a second, but whether it's bundles, exclusive ranges, stocking fillers for Christmas, I think there's a real opportunity. Retail is often this next quarter is called the golden quarter for retail. So I think as organizations, as cultural organizations, we can really kind of do more with that. And lastly, I think it's important to diversify income streams. So venue hire, gifting, and memberships, again, is a really important one. So I'll come on to that in a second, a bit more detail. So these are kind of strategic actions from the data that we've seen, what we'd recommend kind of focusing on for this next quarter. I'm going to speed through them just so we've got some time for questions. So I think, as John said, double down on programming. That's going to be the biggest driver of income. So whatever you can do in the remaining portion of the year is going to be important. If you can react to news events, if you can react to things that are in your local area, then definitely do so. In terms of optimizing catering, that could be festive menus. When it comes to retail, it could be smart product ranges that tie to your programming. And I think it's a really, really useful nugget to know as well. I think those that have done really well in terms of retail for August and July are those that tied their retail offering to their programming. And as a commercial incentive, I think that's really important to tie them together. To people that are coming to these exhibits want to take something away from it. Obviously, venue hire, when it comes to the end of the year, Christmas is a really, really key part of the year when it comes to Christmas parties. So organizations are booking later and later. I know at Navigate, I don't think we've booked anything yet for our Christmas party, which we're going to look forward to. So it's not too late to work up your messaging, work up your packages, and have that kind of incentive for people that are going to book later, or maybe lock in with a small deposit instead. So that flexibility is key. Communicating value is probably my biggest take home, because I feel like when we talk about value, we're not talking about the ticket prices, we're not talking about how long they're going to spend your day out. It's about the value of the experience, whether it's a couple on a date, whether it's a family, whether it's an older audience, whether it's a school visit. Communicating what the experience they're going to have is really, really important for the remaining part of the year. And obviously, I think what's been really interesting with 2025 is, I think when I speak to people and they say, how are you doing? And they say, oh, we haven't done as well as planned. I think what that means is we did okay last year. We set our budgets quite a bit higher, and we've not achieved that growth. They might actually be doing comparatively to last year, but maybe their budgets and their targets were set slightly too high. So there's that feeling of, okay, we haven't quite reached our potential. So I think it's really, really important to obviously make the most of this next 3 months, but really plan smartly for 2026 as well. So that's me. It was a rapid response, but hopefully useful.
Thank you very much, Ollie. Ollie from Navigate, who are the association's marketing partners. Thank you, Ollie. Appreciate that rapid run through. Okay, so it's just gone 1:45, so but we're happy to stay on for any more questions, and I'm just going to wrap up the call. So Emily Rapley, I notice you've got your hand up, so very happy if you want to, if I can unmute you and you want to ask a question, I'll just give you a moment to gather yourself, or that may have been an accidental hand up, which often happens, Emily, no worries. And Ollie, are you happy to share your slides after the call as well, I believe?
I am, yes, that's no worries at all.
Right, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop in the chat. Our next scheduled webinar is post-Christmas, believe it or not. We have it scheduled for early February. As you know, these are free webinars, so I'm going to put the link in the chat now so you can book onto that, and we'll have insights from winter and Christmas performance. If at any point you want to suggest a special question, John mentioned some of the special questions at the end of the presentation, then feel free to email us. I'm going to pop my email address in the chat. The other thing is, if you have not yet had a look at the actual dashboard itself, if you head to our website, make sure you're logged into your account, and you will see the Barometer link in the menu there. If you go in there logged in as a member, you will be able to access the dashboard, and you'll be able to see all of the different segmentation options on the screen. If you have any questions about access to the webinar, if you're not sure if your organisation is taking part or you would like to take part, again, feel free to email me in the first instance. What we're really, really keen to do is make sure it is as representative as of the sector as a whole. So we do, as sort of John mentioned, in terms of our coverage in Wales, we're continuing to look to grow all types and size and geographic location of organisations, so it is as useful to everybody as possible. Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you, Ollie from Navigate, John, Decision House, and Paul. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us this morning. We look forward to seeing you soon. We will share the recording and slides in a post-event email, and I hope to see you, as many of you possible, in February, which sounds mad, but I'm sure we'll speak before then. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Great to see you.
Thanks very much. Cheers.